One of the philosophers, writers, great thinkers I've always looked up to was Malcolm Gladwell, and is Malcolm Gladwell. He was someone in my mid to late 20s, someone had turned me on to. It was a more, the person who turned me on to Malcolm Gladwell's podcast was a more progressive liberal thinker, and I was espousing those views at this time. And I read like Tipping Points, listened to his podcasts, Revisionist History, and I'm blanking. And I've read three or four of his other books, and they always one of the main credits that they always gripped me. They always were able to keep me engaged and really give me different patterns of thinking, and I appreciated that a lot. And I really followed him up until I think he was on the Joe Rogan podcast and was talking about his one of his books at the time. I'm blanking on the name, but it essentially was Talking to Strangers. That was it. It was Talking to Strangers, where he presented evidence that a lot of disconnects between human beings and tough situations come from lack of communication. And really, I think he was pretty spot on with this. I think a couple of the examples he had was um, a a black woman having a cigarette in her car while kind of being verbally accosted by a white officer, and how that ultimately led to the unjust arrest of the woman and her killing herself in a jail cell, and the police trying to not take responsibility for it. And the other one, which is really interesting, and I'd have to relook at, was I believe he talked about Amanda Knox and her journey, and which has been very much eye opening to how legal systems can get caught up in narratives and just look to find a scapegoat to put someone away if the public demands it. So um, I don't know where if Amanda Knox would agree with what Malcolm Gladwell said, but it still was spot on, probably to his working theory that there's disconnects in human communication that lead to really bad and adverse results. What I wanted to get into was there seemed to be a split between those who followed Malcolm Gladwell to the left or right. And Malcolm Gladwell has been presented as a leftist, a Black Lives Matter, and liberal type thinker, which I don't think he would have any shame in agreeing that that's true. What happens though is that probably hurt a lot of his more moderate or conservative followers that really enjoy the things such as the 10,000 hours and that hard work pays off. Through his mathematical equation that if you put in 10,000 hours, you can become an expert at something. He probably lost some of the support. One of the big moments that really shocked me was the fact that he lost the Musk debate to Douglas Murray, right? Douglas Murray is this kind of a jerky, charismatic Brit that loves to trample on minorities and power struggles in the United States and in Europe. And they really clashed at this debate, and I have watched it a few times. And what struck out to me the most was how much Douglas Murray just discarded Malcolm Gladwell and seemed to get off on the fact that he beat them in the debate, not looking to reflect any further as to why or where Malcolm Gladwell was coming from. And then Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, in response to the month's debate, where it floored me, where he actually has a clip saying, I fucking hated this guy, essentially talking about Douglas Murray. Malcolm Gladwell essentially was saying, this fucking dude, Douglas Murray, is everything that I espouse on the right that I hate, you know? He's dissing minorities. He's playing to white supremacy. He is tinkering with journalistic standards and using that slick tongue, right, like he tries to do, to get his point across. And I have to give Malcolm Gladwell some credit for playing that clip, and I think has really put the ball back in Douglas Murray's court, because he essentially says, I don't like you, dude. I don't like, he doesn't say it to his face, but I don't like that dude, and maybe that's why my debate performance was so bad, because I got emotional. And it gave me pause, because I knew Malcolm Gladwell was like a black person, but it was sad to hear him talk with his, it was sad to think, it's really sad to think that he was hurt because his mom's black, is Jamaican, and Douglas Murray has such disdain, it seems like, for minorities. So when you really hear people's feelings like that, it's really it's eye opening because they're sharing a part of themselves that um, they likely would not really want to share with other people. And again, I think Douglas Murray has a lot to say for being so snippet, arrogant, and such a pussy, and not responding back to Malcolm Gladwell and just resting on his small little laurels of winning the month's debate. So glad to see that Murray's got his ass kicked by Dave Smith. Not that happy that Bill Maher's, trying to hold him up on a pedestal, but I respect Bill Maher a ton, and always keep an open mind when he presents people. But yeah, I hope to see a rematch of Douglas Murray versus Malcolm Gladwell where they can really have it out. And maybe Malcolm Gladwell will come with some brass knuckles and really try to stick it to Douglas Murray where he can't take it. Because, his weaknesses are going to be now he's the Mr. Elitist. He's a disconnected journalist that goes and covers war-torn areas just to support his right-wing propaganda. There's a lot you can get him on now. So, yeah, would love to see a Douglas Murray versus Malcolm Gladwell rekindling of the debate. See if they can address why there is such ill will following the Musk's debate, and maybe they'll end up, having a newfound respect for each other, which I think ultimately is what everybody's looking for. So, yeah, we'll be on the edge of our seats seeing what's next from Malcolm Gladwell and Douglas Murray.